Mary Johnson was the kind of mother everyone thought they knew, but behind the smiles and bake-sale charm lay a secret so chilling it would only come to light after the sudden, shocking deaths of her 3 young sons. The Johnsons were the kind of family people pointed to when they wanted to show what suburban life in Ohio should look like. Their 2-story home sat at the end of a cul-de-sac lined with trimmed lawns, swing sets, and friendly neighbors who waved from their porches. Mary Johnson, the mother of 3 young boys, was often seen in the front yard tending to flowers or setting out folding chairs for her children's lemonade stand. To anyone watching, she looked like a woman who had gracefully handled hardship. Her husband had left years before, yet Mary kept smiling, raising her sons with what seemed like endless patience. Parents at school events admired her. Teachers praised her involvement. She was the mom who showed up early to decorate classrooms and stayed late to clean up after birthday parties. What most people noticed first was how devoted she seemed. She called her sons her 3 blessings and rarely let them out of sight. While other children roamed the neighborhood in groups, Mary's boys stayed close to home. They played in the yard or inside the house, always under her watchful eye. When friends asked why she kept them so close, she would laugh softly and say she just worried too much. After all, she said, the world was dangerous and she wanted to make sure her boys grew up safe and healthy. Few people questioned it. To most, her protectiveness was proof of her love. Still, there were details that seemed unusual if one looked closely. Mary had a way of controlling the environment around her sons that went beyond ordinary parental concern. She packed their lunches herself, never letting them buy cafeteria food. She insisted on being present at every doctor's appointment, often answering questions for them before the boys could speak. Even their playtime seemed curated, limited to activities she chose. Neighbors shrug it off as quirks of an anxious single mother. No one wanted to believe that anything darker could be hiding in such a seemingly wholesome picture. Her boys themselves were lively and well-mannered, though some noticed they seemed shy in larger groups. Matthew, the oldest, loved drawing superheroes and dreamed of being an artist. Ethan, the middle child, was adventurous but often held back by his mother's constant reminders to be careful. Jacob, the youngest, adored animals and could spend hours watching birds at the feeder by their kitchen window. The 3 of them were close, often playing together in the driveway while Mary sat nearby in a lawn chair with a book. To passers-by, it looked idyllic, a mother present and engaged, a family united in love. But behind the curtain of perfection, there were whispers that not everyone dismissed. Some parents at school noticed how Mary avoided letting her boys attend sleepovers, even when other children begged. Others remembered times when she declined playdates, claiming her sons weren't feeling well. Once, at a holiday gathering, a neighbor mentioned how oddly calm Mary seemed when one of her boys tripped and scraped his knee. While most mothers would rush forward in a panic, Mary simply dabbed the wound with a napkin, almost detached, as if she had already prepared for the moment. Those who caught these glimpses pushed the unease aside. After all, Mary's life looked enviable in many ways. She managed a warm home, raised polite children, and balanced everything alone. To outsiders, she embodied strength, a woman who had turned hardship into inspiration. No one wanted to dig deeper or consider the possibility that her devotion might not be what it seemed. The surface was too convincing, the image too perfect, and the truth, whatever it was, remained hidden in plain sight. It happened on a gray autumn morning that started like any other. The Johnson house was alive with the usual routine backpacks being zipped, cereal bowls clinking against the kitchen counter, the rush of children preparing for school. Mary seemed calm, moving with a practiced rhythm, making sure each boy had everything he needed. Nothing about that morning suggested the storm that was about to unfold. Later that day, a frantic call brought paramedics racing to the house. 5-year-old Jacob, the youngest, had collapsed without warning. His small body lay still, and despite every desperate attempt by the medical team, he could not be revived. The shock rippled quickly through the quiet Ohio neighborhood. Neighbors stood on their porches as the ambulance pulled away, watching in stunned silence. News spread fast. Mary's baby boy was gone. The explanation was devastating but simple. Doctors said Jacob had suffered a sudden respiratory failure, a rare but tragic medical event. Mary's face became the very picture of grief. She clutched a framed photo of Jacob during the small memorial service held at the church, tears streaking down her cheeks as she thanked friends for their support. Everyone who saw her believed they were witnessing the raw, unfiltered heartbreak of a mother who had just lost her child. The community wrapped its arms around her. Families brought casseroles and baked goods to her doorstep. Teachers sent cards filled with handwritten notes from classmates who didn't quite understand why Jacob wouldn't be coming back to school. At the grocery store, people stopped her to offer condolences, their eyes brimming with sympathy. Mary, always soft-spoken, accepted each gesture with a sad smile and words of gratitude. The town mourned with her, never doubting for a moment that her pain was real. Inside the hospital, however, not everyone was convinced by the simplicity of the explanation. One nurse who had been in the room during Jacob's final moments noticed something unsettling. While other parents in similar situations screamed, begged, or fell apart, Mary had been strangely composed. She wept afterward, yes, but during the crucial minutes when Jacob's life hung in the balance, her face was almost serene. The nurse mentioned it quietly to a colleague, but without evidence, it was nothing more than a feeling. In a world ruled by medical charts and lab results, feelings held no weight. Jacob's death was officially ruled as natural causes. There were no signs of foul play, no reason to question further. For investigators, the case closed before it even began. Mary's quiet dignity in the face of loss only reinforced the belief that she was a woman struck by cruel fate. Friends told themselves it could have happened to anyone. Tragedy, after all, was unpredictable. As the weeks passed, life seemed to settle back into a new rhythm. Mary kept her other two boys close, holding their hands a little tighter, watching them a little more closely. Neighbors saw her devotion and thought it was the understandable reaction of a grieving mother. No one realized then that this would not be the last time tragedy would visit the Johnson household. Jacob's death was seen as a single heartbreaking accident, but it was only the beginning of a story no one could have imagined. 2 years passed, and though the Johnson family carried on, the shadow of Jacob's death never truly lifted. Mary seemed more protective than ever, rarely allowing her two surviving sons, Matthew and Ethan, out of her sight. The boys grew quieter, less adventurous than their classmates, but no one thought much of it. People said they were simply still healing, adjusting to life after such a terrible loss. Mary often spoke about her angels in heaven watching over us, words that drew tears from friends who admired her strength. Then, one spring afternoon, tragedy struck again. Ethan, just 8 years old, fell gravely ill without warning. He had been playing in the living room when he suddenly complained of being unable to catch his breath. Panic filled the house, and an ambulance was called. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but despite every effort, Ethan's young life slipped away. The doctors, baffled, concluded once more that respiratory failure was the cause. The similarity to Jacob's death was chilling, yet no one wanted to believe lightning could strike the same family twice. The community reeled. Losing one child was unimaginable, but losing two in such a short span felt almost unbearable. At Ethan's funeral, the pews overflowed with mourners. Neighbors wept openly as Mary stood at the front of the church, clutching a stuffed animal Ethan once carried everywhere. Her tears were steady, her voice breaking as she thanked everyone for their prayers. Many whispered that they had never seen such strength in the face of relentless heartbreak. To them, she was a mother carrying a burden too cruel for anyone to endure. But behind the scenes, doubts were beginning to stir. A handful of neighbors whispered about the strange coincidence. Doctors rarely saw sudden respiratory failure in healthy children, and now it had happened twice in the same family. A few wondered if perhaps there was an undetected genetic condition. Others thought maybe something in the Johnson home mold, toxins, or an environmental hazard was to blame. Yet no evidence surfaced to support these theories, and the questions dissolved into hushed rumors rather than formal inquiries. One person, however, could not shake their unease. The same nurse who had witnessed Mary's unnerving composure during Jacob's death was also present when Ethan was rushed to the hospital. Once again, she saw something that didn't fit. Mary's reactions seemed oddly rehearsed, her face betraying none of the wild panic most parents displayed in such moments. She cried later, but in those critical minutes she appeared almost detached, as though she were watching rather than living through the nightmare. The nurse mentioned her concerns to a supervisor, but without medical evidence, the remarks were dismissed. Meanwhile, Mary continued to live as the grieving mother of 2 lost sons. Sympathy poured in, even greater than before. Donations were collected to help her with expenses, neighbors rotated bringing meals, and the local church organized prayer groups in her name. Outwardly, she seemed to embody resilience. Her surviving son, Matthew, became her sole focus. She was always by his side, speaking of how precious he was, how she couldn't imagine losing him too. Still, in the quiet corners of the town, unease lingered. The question no one wanted to voice grew heavier. How could one family endure to nearly identical tragedies without something more being at play? And though the whispers remained muted, the pattern was undeniable. Jacob's death no longer looked like a solitary stroke of misfortune. It had become the first piece in a puzzle no one yet dared to solve. The final blow came one summer evening when the neighborhood was winding down from a long, hot day. Children rode bikes in the cul-de-sac, sprinklers sprayed across trimmed lawns, and families prepared for dinner. At the Johnson home, the house was quiet, almost too quiet. Mary later told friends she had gone to check on her oldest son, Matthew, who was reading in bed. By the time she entered his room, she said, he was no longer breathing. Her scream shattered the calm of the street, drawing neighbors to their windows. An ambulance arrived within minutes, but there was nothing anyone could do. Matthew, only 12 years old, was gone. The town could no longer accept this as ordinary tragedy. 3 boys, all healthy, all dying suddenly in less than 5 years, was beyond belief. Authorities who had once offered condolences now returned with suspicion. The medical examiner ordered a full toxicology report, something that had not been done with Jacob or Ethan. When the results came back, they sent shockwaves through the investigation. Traces of unusual substances were found in Matthew's system, chemicals not naturally occurring in the body and not prescribed by any doctor. The cause of death could no longer be written off as natural. Detectives began to re-examine the Johnson family's history. They looked back at Jacob's and Ethan's files, searching for similarities that might have been overlooked. The pattern was undeniable. Each boy had died suddenly with little to no medical explanation, each time under Mary's care. Doctors who had signed the earlier reports admitted that the cases had puzzled them, but without strong evidence, they had assumed the simplest explanation. Now, those assumptions were collapsing. Attention turned toward Mary herself. Detectives obtained a search warrant for her home, determined to uncover whether the substances found in Matthew's body could be traced back to something inside the house. What they discovered in the neatly kept cupboards and drawers unsettled even the most seasoned investigators. Hidden in the bathroom cabinet were bottles of medication with labels peeled off, vials of liquid substances with no prescriptions attached, and syringes tucked into a box at the back of a shelf. None of it matched anything a doctor had given her or her children. More disturbing still were the journals found in her bedroom. At first glance, they read like the thoughts of a lonely mother, filled with passages about her struggles, her fears of abandonment, and her resentment of being left to raise the boys alone. But the deeper investigators read, the more troubling the entries became. She wrote about how people only truly cared about her when she was suffering, how she longed for sympathy, how tragedy seemed to bring her the attention she craved. Some passages hinted at darker thoughts, reflections on control and the power she felt when others leaned on her in times of crisis. The picture that had once been so perfect was now unraveling thread by thread. To the outside world, Mary was the grieving mother who had endured the unimaginable. Inside her home, investigators were piecing together a different story, one where grief was not an accident of fate but a consequence of calculated choices. With the evidence mounting, the mask she had worn for years was slipping and the truth was beginning to emerge. The walls finally closed in on Mary Johnson when the evidence from her home was presented alongside the toxicology results. The image of the grieving mother that had once shielded her now worked against her. Investigators saw through the tears and soft smiles, focusing instead on the undeniable pattern of loss that followed her every step. 3 healthy boys, gone in nearly identical circumstances, was no coincidence. When detectives confronted her, Mary maintained her innocence at first, insisting she was a victim of unthinkable misfortune. But the journals told a different story, and the medications without prescriptions raised questions she could not answer. The case moved quickly from suspicion to certainty. Forensic specialists tied the chemicals found in Matthew's system to the unmarked vials discovered in her cabinet. Medical experts re-examined Jacob's and Ethan's files, noting how their symptoms matched the same substances. What had once been labeled as natural causes now appeared deliberate. Each boy's death, investigators argued, had been carefully orchestrated. The town that once pitied Mary now turned against her. People who had delivered food to her doorstep and prayed for her comfort were horrified to think they had embraced someone capable of such betrayal. The trial drew national attention, courtrooms filled with reporters, neighbors, and distant relatives who could hardly believe the charges. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of a woman who thrived on sympathy, who found validation in tragedy. They described a cycle in which Mary created devastation to keep herself at the center of attention, each son's death ensuring a wave of support that she seemed to crave. Her journals, read aloud in court, sent shivers through the audience. The words, once private, revealed not only loneliness but also an obsession with being noticed, with being needed, even if it meant sacrificing the very lives she had brought into the world. The defense tried to argue that Mary was misunderstood, that her writings were the reflections of a broken heart, not a blueprint for murder. They suggested medical conditions could still explain the deaths, though no clear diagnosis had ever been found. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury did not need long to deliberate. Mary was found guilty, her facade of innocence stripped away completely. For the community, the verdict brought both relief and heartbreak, relief that the truth had been uncovered, that Matthew's suspicious death had forced a closer look at the past. Heartbreak because 3 innocent boys had been lost before anyone realized the danger they faced. Neighbors who once admired Mary now struggled with guilt, wondering how they had missed the signs. Some recalled the uneasy moments, the odd composure, the controlling behaviors, and asked themselves why they had brushed them aside. Mary's name became etched into the dark history of the town, a reminder that evil can hide behind the most familiar of faces. The Johnson home, once a symbol of resilience, stood empty, its cheerful flower beds now overgrown. The story of Mary Johnson and her 3 sons lingered long after the trial ended, serving as a chilling lesson about the shadows that can lurk behind closed doors and the dangers of trusting appearances without question.